Hi, writers. In this video, I'm going to walk through why just sit down and write is not always the best advice a writer can get, and in some circumstances can be the absolute worst advice a writer can get. And I know that may sound wild, but stick with me because in the next 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to walk through what happens internally when we hear that advice and just one context in which that advice completely does not hold water. And if what I talk about today resonates with you, I want to share with you today free Good Jelly's phase task map. And this will give you a broader sense of the different type of legit work you can be doing in different phases of a writing project that may not be writing, but will absolutely and legitimately be moving your writing project forward. And if you want that, just comment below with the phrase phase me. Now, before we get there, my name is Christine Karen. I'm the founder of Good Jelly and the creator of the JAM method. And for the past 30 years, I've been helping creative thinkers, artists, and writers just like you get their work done with greater ease, confidence, and delight. And this is absolutely not productivity by punishment or force. It's a style of productivity that is based in smart process, grounded power, and expansive kindness. Okay, so let's dive in. First, to what happens when we hear this advice, just sit down and write. So if you've been on the writing adventure, even for only 5 minutes, you've probably picked up on the advice and the kind of expectation of writers that you should be writing daily. And most likely in your head, you've attached some kind of word count to it, whether it's 200 words a day or 2,000 or 20,000 words a day. There's probably some sense that well, I really should be writing every day. And this advice is so baked in to, it's like it's an echo chamber of write daily, get your butt in the chair and write. And what happens is that advice is so intensive and complete. Not only do we get it from the outside, we start taking it on the inside. So our inner critic, our inner pusher, our inner perfectionist all start giving ourselves this advice in our head. And then what happens if we're not writing daily? Maybe your schedule doesn't allow for that. Maybe there's other things that you know would really help your writing project move forward, but it's not writing. And what happens is if we're not writing, this emotional, sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle backlash starts to happen. And we may start feeling like, oh my goodness, I must be procrastinating. So procrastination. Another one is, oh my goodness, I must be in the throes of resistance or avoidance. I'm doing this because I don't want to write. Well, maybe you're organizing your files to make your writing flow easier when you get to it. Or another one is one of my favorites is we just don't want it enough. So lack of commitment. And then one that is pretty deep in our culture, which is very much a doing and doing and doing culture, is if you're not writing daily, and this comes up a lot for the writers in my program, we wrestle with this, is that, oh my goodness, you must be lazy. And I'm hoping that you recognize some of these. And I want to highlight this because what all this builds is a level of mindset friction. And it also assumes that the only legit writerly work for a writer is writing. But if you just step out of that kind of haze of this advice, write daily, write daily, write daily, you recognize that there is a whole lot of other legit writing work if you want to ace the writing adventure. That could be things like marketing. It could be things like researching. It could be things like brainstorming. And to take this even to a more specific level, today I want to focus, I promise that one context, and I want to look at a writing project by phase. So let me get this in here. Sorry, I have an alarm going off. I want to look at writing projects by phases. So I got the wrong thing there. This is what happens when I get distracted when I'm giving you all a little talk here. So imagine this is a writing project, and it's very simplified. And a project, as you can imagine, starts out like you have lots of ideas and then it hones in. And then at a certain magical point, you get that writing project done. Now, there are some phases after this, but I want to keep it really simple today. So let's just imagine there's an ideation phase where you're thinking about the ideas, brainstorming. Then there's the drafting phase. And then there's a revision phase. So you recognize this is really simplified. The thing I want to point out is just ask yourself, what is the most logical place where you're likely writing daily? And that's, of course, in the drafting phase. This is when you're putting words to page, the manuscript length, the essay length, the memoir length is getting longer and longer as you write more. In the ideation phase, I already spoke to a little bit about what could be going on there, brainstorming, research. Maybe part of your process is during the ideation phase, you do a lot of research. One of the writers in my program, she was writing a historical novel, and she was taking regular trips to different areas around the New England area to research the historical figures that she was writing about. Now, in the revision phase, this can be pretty tricky because you're certainly in that manuscript and you're working it, but depending on how you draft, it gets tricky because people associate that write every day, and you, of course, could be revising every day, and that's technically writing and working on the novel. But where people get tripped up, I find, is that they still attach increasing word count in a revision. Now, if you write, like one of my writing friends does, very sparely in a first draft, your revision still may be going up in word count during a revision. But I have another friend who just writes fully and freely in a first draft. And so her revision process is cutting that manuscript down, really honing in on what are the most important pieces to keep. So in her case, in a revision, the word count will go down. So you can imagine if she has in her head that not only is she supposed to be writing daily, that her word count is supposed to be getting up, again, this internal friction and kind of back and forth and a further drag on her productivity is because there's this subtle thing of the word count is going down. Now, when you look at this, you can say, okay, Christine, I'm flowing with you. But the thing is, I don't put my writing projects together in such structured phases like this. And I would say, yes, that is part of the point as well. Every writer's process is different. Maybe you're the kind of writer who goes back and forth between ideation and drafting. Maybe you're the type of writer who does just start writing and figures out the plot or the story or your argument as you're writing. That is absolutely a legit way to create a writing project. And other writers maybe map out the whole thing first. That's their process. But for a writer who ideates and then drafts, maybe they have some days where they're brainstorming, where they're stepping back, where they're thinking about, okay, what is the next chapter going to look like? And then the next day is drafting. You could have some writers who ideate, draft, and revise all the way through. So on a day-to-day basis, the dynamic and the shifts of the type of writing task they're working on to move that project forward could vary versus someone who's very, structured and said, first I'm going to brainstorm, get it all mapped out, then I'm going to draft, then I'm going to revise. And this is the point, and this is one of my frustrations with this kind of pat advice of just sit down and write that we hear like a broken record. It's that each of you have a unique process. You have a unique creative rhythm. You have unique preferences for how you like to put a writing project together. And furthermore, as depending on where you are in your writing adventure, you may have realized, wow, every writing project is different. So instead of giving writers this pat advice, one size fits all, you must write daily, I want to invite you to start thinking, hey, my productivity approach, my productivity toolkit has to start supporting me in the way I like to create. I don't want you anymore to have to think you have to contort yourself to some writing productivity rules or writing productivity approach. And when we start letting go of this strange expectation that every writer must write daily to be a quote real writer, a professional writer, we start getting more freedom and actually more flow in moving our writing projects forward. I hope this little conversation today has given you some ahas, perhaps given you a little sense of gumption and more confidence in you trusting what is the right next action for you to move your writing project forward, even if that doesn't happen to be today, getting your butt in the chair and writing. And remember, if you want a little deeper dive into these ideas, just drop me a line below with the phrase phase me, and I will get you Good Jelly's phase task map, which will give you even more ideas of truly legitimate writing work, depending on where you are in a phase of a project. And of course, then you adapt that to your style of how you like to flow through a writing project. Until then, happy day, happy creating, happy jamming. You've got this.